Welcome to Stochastic Agency, a channel where we chat about RPGs and playing them. Today we're going to go over and take a look at Free League's Year Zero engine, the system behind several games such as Forbidden Lands, Mutant Year Zero, Vesson, and Coriolis. If you'd like to go over the system reference document, I'll have links to it in the description below. Though not released as an open system in its early days when Free League purchased the license from Mutant, Sweden's most popular RPG, the Year Zero engine now lives in the OGL sphere. Unlike other OGLs, the Year Zero engine SRD is just the engine block. It provides coverage of the most basic rules of the system, but you will not be up and running a game. Unlike other SRDs you might come across, it doesn't currently contain any gear or setting inhabitants that a character could face. It is not a quick start guide. Year Zero engine games are driven by the players and character actions, creating so-called story-driven moments. Games that use the Year Zero engine are fast and accessible, though. Some lament the use of special dice. These are not 100% necessary. Gather up and use any six-sided dice, but make sure they are 3 different colors. All the engine variations use the same dice pool of six-sided dice. Preferably, you're going to need about 10 to 15 in 3 different colors. Some variations like Forbidden Lands also use 8, 10, and 12-sided dice, but more on that when we talk about Forbidden Lands in particular. This makes moving from one variation to another easy. The dice pool is a combination of 3 parts. The first is an attribute, typically strength, wits, agility, and empathy, though some might rename these depending on the theme. Often you'll hear this group called base dice. Next is a skill, and these, along with the gear, will change to match the theme. How are characters made? Creating a character is easy. Choose an archetype for that character. They provide these in each variation. Depending on the age of the character, this choice can affect the pool of points you get when spending points on attributes and skills. Variations often limit the skill list to about 12 core skills, but they have broad coverage for many situations. Again, the skills in the list can change depending on the theme of the variation. Then choose some theme-dependent talents that help inform other aspects of the character. Access to some talents might depend on the character archetype. Many variations ask the player to define a big dream, a dark secret, something the character takes pride in, as well as the character's relationship with other characters. So lastly, let's pick a name, describe the character's appearance, and gather up some gear. Now we're ready to play. Now, not all Year Zero engine games follow the exact pattern like this, but they are close. There is one that stands out furthest apart from the rest, and that's Tales from the Loop. How do you play the game? Well, things can go as described until, as the result of describing the character's actions, the outcome is uncertain. So the dice pool looks like this, with each group represented by a different color. Attribute plus skill plus gear equals the total number of dice rolled. So when making a roll, the only 2 numbers you're looking for are 1s and 6s. A 1 is bad, but getting a 6 is good. Getting more of either is potentially bad or good. Didn't get the result you were hoping for? That's okay, because the engine uses a push mechanic, meaning that you can roll or re-roll certain dice that did not result in a 1 or a 6. But be careful. This is the one mechanic that makes the Year Zero engine adaptable and punishing to play. Pushing a roll represents a character driving themselves to the limits. It's also something that can cause harmful side effects. How do you know if you were successful? For that, all you need is just 1 die that results in a 6. Although the more 6s you get, the better. It's likely that your character has gear and they always have their attributes, right? So even if a character doesn't have a particular skill, you can still make a roll just using those dice. So often, the dice get rolled too much. Just remember that not all things in an RPG equate to the need to roll the dice. In fact, it's better that rolling only happens when something is absolutely necessary. So just about every variation of the Year Zero engine has in it a chart showing the chance of success based on the number of dice being rolled, or when pushing a roll. Also keep in mind there's an artful way to fail in RPGs. and that failure is not a full stop to the action. That is, unless it's the last thing a character does before they die. What's all this talk about pushing a roll? Remember when I said you can re-roll certain dice? Okay, so when making a roll, dice that represents a character's skill do not count as ones when they result in them. This also means that you do not get to re-roll these dice during a push roll. However, if either of the base dice, the attribute dice, or gear dice did not result in a 1 or a 6, you can push those dice. Not just some, but all. This is an all or nothing choice. Once a roll is pushed, that's it. The character can't push the roll again. After that, there is no other chance to roll the dice for that character's action. However, just rolling a 1 doesn't mean a total failure and nothing happens. Something always happens. It's just that when pushing a roll is when something terrible can happen. So, during the first roll of the dice, 1s don't count for anything other than you can't re-roll these dice during a push roll. However, they take on meaning when making a push roll. You retain all those 1s, roll the rest of your dice, and a 1 causes problems with gear on those dice when they result. Did the gear break or become less effective? On base dice, the attribute dice, they subtract or cause damage to that attribute. This is equivalent to straining yourself when lifting something heavy, getting confused when making a knowledge-based skill check. Did you slip and fall when making a daring maneuver? These are all things that can cause an attribute damage. Why would you want to push a roll? Aside from succeeding and possibly performing a stunt with the extra 6s, many of the Year Zero engine games have a currency that the character gains when they push a roll. This currency is often necessary to perform certain actions related to a special piece of gear or a talent in that variation. Don't push any rolls and you don't gain any of that currency. Group actions. If all the characters partake in a particular action like sneaking as a group, only one player makes the roll. As you might have guessed, the player that is the one with the lowest total number of dice available for the roll is the one who makes it. A failed roll here means failure for everyone. This doesn't hold true for combat, though. In a fight, each player rolls their dice for their own character's actions. Opposed actions. Actions opposed by a character controlled by the Game Master take place when both sides roll dice. Each 6 in each dice pool cancels each other out until one side has 1 or more 6s remaining. That side wins. Changing a dice pool. A pool of dice the player rolls is changeable because of certain factors beyond their control. When this happens, the dice added to or removed from the pool are only skill dice, nothing else. Usually this means adding or subtracting up to 3 dice. Now, I will not cover skills and talents while chatting with you. If you want to take a look at any of that for the Year Zero engine, you can take a look at the download of the system reference document found in the description below. Getting around the world. Moving around the world is straightforward and sometimes makes use of a map. Depending on what scale the map is, you might move from one area, a zone, to another. Zones are just a way of breaking up space into chunks. A zone often has a descriptor to go with it. A hall, one zone, can be described as cramped or dark. These descriptors often affect actions performed within them. In a zone, how far something is away from the character could be described as engaged or right next to them, say arm's length. Short means that whatever it is in the same zone, at least, as the character. Medium is an adjacent zone, so they're over there, while long and extreme could be 4 or more zones. On a large world map, you might track progress by moving from square to square. These are just much larger zones. Keep in mind that the use of maps is just a tool to keep connections between how far apart things are to each other. If you need a map on the fly, just use a spare piece of paper. How long does something take? A round is about 5 to 10 seconds, usually in combat. A stretch is about 5 to 10 minutes. Say when you explore a zone the character is in. A shift is 1/4 of a day, like morning, day, evening, and night. Again, tracking is only important when it's necessary until a character is under pressure, for example, in combat, or there are things in the story that need to take place behind the scenes, maybe planned out by the game master. What happens when? The default way to determine what happens when, especially in combat, is with a deck of 10 cards. Numbered 1 through 10, each player draws a card, and that's it. The order is from lowest to highest, and cards are not drawn again. However, players can exchange their cards with another. Is getting things done just that easy? Well, yes and no. Some actions a character performs are considered fast, like drawing a weapon, making an attack, or moving through a door, while others are slow, such as crawling, reloading a weapon, or performing first aid. RPGs often refer to this concept as the game's action economy, and it only comes into play during combat when you're under pressure. When there is a need to keep track of things, slow and fast actions become more important, though depending on the situation and how long something takes, can depend on the context of the situation. What happens when a character gets hurt? Characters are harmed in one of two ways. The first is, of course, from combat or something in the environment. When damage is dealt to a character in a Year Zero Engine game, the amount of damage is mitigated by whatever they're wearing for protection. Damage is determined by a weapon's rating, and here's where rolling additional d6s come in handy. Each additional 6 can add to the damage dealt, or be used to perform a stunt, if available. The second way in which a character takes damage is when there are 1s in a pushed dice roll pool. Whatever attribute was used in the dice pool, and when the dice roll is pushed, is the attribute that takes damage. How much damage can a character take? Well, here's the thing. Those attributes, those are the health of your character. Having an attribute damage reduces the number of dice available when making any rolls that uses that attribute. Having an attribute reach 0 is bad. Any attribute that reaches 0 is considered broken. When can a character die? If a character's strength or wits is just 0, roll for a critical injury. Any additional damage causes more critical injuries. As a result of this, the character is only killed if the critical injury results in a fatal injury. So, death only results when that is rolled on the critical injury chart. Something to keep in mind, while a character can achieve a broken attribute as a result of pushing an action, this will not cause the character to have critical injuries, nor will it cause the character to die from a broken attribute. Is that all there is? Essentially, yes. There are other elements such as ambushing opponents, getting cover from objects, how gear works, and so on and so forth, but this all varies depending on the type and theme of game. Fire, poison, explosions, blocking also vary in the different types of flavors of the Year Zero engine. There are two things left to mention. Conditions are a state that the character could experience, such as starvation, thirst, exhaustion, and freezing. Not all variations make use of these particular conditions, but they place part of the Year Zero engine game's focus on survival. The other is to some a controversial inclusion. Some see social conflict to be wholly part of the role-playing experience and do not like actually having to roll dice to resolve these things. The Year Zero engine does include a very easy-to-use and manage social conflict part of its engine. This is essentially the Year Zero engine. It's a D6 dice pool. You roll and sort into 1s and 6s. You have the option to push certain uncategorized dice to get a better success with the chance of making something worse. If you push a roll, the character gains a meta currency to spend on other things like powers or talents. As with any game system, the more you play it, the faster the engine runs. Rolling, sorting, deciding to push a roll become one skill that moves fast over several sessions. So that's really it. This is the initial foray into covering some Free League publishing games. The Year Zero engine is available for your own customization out there on the web. If you haven't already, go ahead and download it from the link below in the description and take a look at it. There's certainly material in there that I didn't cover, but you get it over and over and over again in all of the various flavors, to one extent or another. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, everybody get out there, get a game in, have some fun, and just be cool with one another.